Yo, I want to talk to you about this formula today, which has a lot of implications for sound design and stuff. It's maybe let's just start with how to read this, specifically the second one, but they're all kind of similar. So if you're not that familiar with maths and stuff, basically cosine and sine are basically the same waveform or the same function that's shifted in phase, but like basically they're both sine waves. So basically what this says, if you multiply two sine waves, you get one wave, one sine wave with the sum of their frequencies and one with the difference of their frequencies. And this works both ways. So if you create one sine wave with like this frequency and one with this, you get basically the same as if you were multiplying these. This is a formula a lot of you have like taken engineering courses or maths courses or something like that, sort of higher math stuff, physics stuff. You will have seen this. If not, it's not that important. I want to recreate this in the grid because it has some really interesting implications about dissonance. Because if we think about this, basically this multiplying to sine waves, that's just amplitude modulation, or like tremolo almost. And having two similar frequency sine waves next to each other, that's basically dissonance. And dissonance and tremolo, they're very similar. So I just kind of want to show you this in the grid. So if we have... Can we actually create more inputs on this? Yeah, we can. Okay, so if we... And these are basically... So what's so interesting about this, that these two ways are basically two different ways at looking at the same thing. So one is kind of looking at it in the time domain and one in the frequency domain. So let's just start with, let's say we have a sine wave here, and we multiply that by another sine wave. So here's our sine wave, and we multiply that by another sine wave. And in terms of time domain, if this other sine wave is lower in frequency or something, basically what we get is, this is maybe not great to see here. Let's just try to sync this up somehow. You can see how we basically get this kind of the sine wave that's just being amplitude modulated. Like it basically has a fast tremolo sort of effect. So if we just like get an attenuated, listen to this output here. And maybe... You can hear how we get this just kind of this volume oscillation, because of course we do get that, because this is a low frequency sine wave, basically an LFO, and it's just changing the volume of this sine wave here. So if we listen to the output, of course we get this wiggle here. But then if we speed this up a little bit, what's kind of interesting is that if we look at this spectrally, we get these two sine waves that are kind of close in frequency. So let's maybe set this resolution a bit higher here. So you can see that this sine wave kind of wiggling and these two sine waves being close to each other in frequency kind of sound the same. So if we just play this back again, in this case it's wiggling so fast that we're hearing it as an harmonic effect, but if we make it wiggle slower by just moving this frequency down, you can see how we still get two sine waves. They're just very close in frequency, so let's maybe make this like this. And the wiggle becomes less of a harmonic and maybe more of a sort of time domain effect, where we kind of hear this rubbing or this oscillation. So if we just kind of take this sine wave, two sine waves at the same frequency, and just pitch one down, we can kind of see how we hear it first as kind of two frequencies, and later on we hear it as one frequency kind of moving up and down. And if we were to create this in the bass, this becomes even more apparent. So if we like get, I don't know, a pitch here. And let's just say, okay, we can set both of these frequencies to F0, which I think is like negative 31 or something. Oh, yep. And just use that as the pitch instead of the C3. So we can kind of see, okay, we get these two waves here that are basically too close to each other frequencies. but it sounds like a wobble. Let me make this a bit louder. So this is what this formula is saying, and this goes both ways. So we could just as well, instead of multiplying these two, add them and just do the kind of phase shift. So if we look at this again, let's just open Firefox again and kind of look it up. So sine, fuck's sake, sine multiplication. I hope the audio is fine right now and it's not messed up somehow. This theorem, so we could go the other way as well. We could create a sine wave that is a frequency plus a certain factor and minus a certain factor, and it will act like this kind of wobbling. So the way that we do that is we have two sine waves here and we add them together and say, okay, right now they're identical. And then, I don't know, we maybe move one up 20 hertz and one down 20 hertz. Oh, we can't do that this way. Doesn't work with this thing. So we'll need to do it a bit differently, and we just do that by adding and subtracting. I'm gonna do a bit of sort of frequency stuff here. So we need to first turn the pitch into a frequency. And then later turn the frequency into a pitch again. And in between we just add 20 and subtract 20 from the other one. And it's kind of the same as multiplying these two waves. So adding two waves close in pitch is kind of the same as ring modulation. I find it really interesting that kind of multiplying and adding these kind of just... So if we listen to this, so you can hear how basically adding these two waves that are very close but not identical in pitch causes them to kind of go in and out of phase, and we get this kind of wobble effect. So this is in the subs right now, so you obviously only can hear this on nice headphones or something. Or like speakers. So let's maybe move up in pitch a little bit, but that'll make it harder to hear. So basically, yeah, adding waves that kind of are very close to each other is basically the same as a tremolo. Now, what's so interesting about this is that this is basically what dissonance is. So this tremolo, this instability in volume, that is dissonance, is my understanding, because dissonance basically is all about either a fundamental wave or two overtones of a wave being very close to each other, but not quite identical, which kind of makes them wobble up and down in volume. Kind of what we talked about in the last video. So how can we use this in sound design? Well, one of the uses I found, and that's kind of interesting with how this shows up on spectrum analyzers and stuff, is that I had someone in the Discord ask about a certain wave. And kind of that basically there was this sound that they wanted to recreate, which was just a sub bass. So once again, you will need good headphones. That was kind of wobbling up and down in frequency fast. And the way that we can create the sub bass is by just using the stereo detune. So making it tune up and down on the phase 4 here, and then just monoing the sound, which basically, if we look at it on a spectrum analyzer, we just add two waves that are similar but not quite the same in pitch to each other. And let me just make sure that we can actually hear this. Why is this not outputting any sound here? Oh, because I turned the volume down and not the width. And depending on how much we detune these two waves, you can kind of see these two different perspectives of the same thing in the spectral and the frequency domain. So in the frequency domain, this will look like two sine waves close to each other in pitch, especially on a higher resolution analyzer. And if we sort of turn this up a little bit, you can see these two peaks here, and same here, sort of see these two sine waves. But if we listen to it and kind of hear it, really what we hear is closer to this, with just the sine wave sort of going up and down in volume. You hear this kind of rubbing effect. You don't really hear it as two separate sines, you hear it as a fast sort of oscillation in volume. So if we make these closer and closer in pitch, basically the oscillation gets slower, I think. So this is basically us going from here to here. So what we're creating are two sine waves, very close in pitch. And then what we're hearing is really more like a sine wave being multiplied by another sine wave. You can really sort of see this here, that basically we have this sine, and it seems to be volume modulated by another sine. So that's, I don't know, something about this equation, it goes both ways. So if you want to create a sub with a tremolo on it, you can just add two sines that are close in frequency to each other. And this is not like an approximation or something, this is identical basically to a sub with like this kind of ring modulation tremolo on it. And likewise, if you want to create two sines that are close to each other in frequency, you can just amplitude modulate one sine with another sine. So like, these two things that we normally think of as quite separate things, it's not like they sound similar to our ears because of psychoacoustics, but it's really that they are mathematically identical. They are the same thing, which is something that's kind of conceptually really interesting, I think, because we don't really think about these two things basically. Oh, we see two peaks here and the wave wobbling around. We don't think of these two things as identical, but you can prove this. I'm not prepared to prove this to right now, but like if you've sat in higher maths lectures or something, there's a good chance that we have proven this equation, like that you kind of worked from, I don't know, either the exponential representation or some other sine theorems and basically used them to prove that this is true here. So this, I don't know, this is something really fascinating to me here, because it really, there's something about how it changes how you think about sound. So basically, if you think about like dissonance in terms of two frequencies that are very close to each other, you can also think about it as a kind of instability in volume that makes it harder to predict. So like if we, for example, just like play two saw waves or something, and some of their harmonics are kind of dissonant. You can see here, okay, we play these two waves here very close to each other in the sub, but really what we're hearing is just one wave going up and down in volume. And it really depends on the amount and the frequency area, so what we hear. So for example, here in the bass, we kind of hear this one wave going up in volume, even though we're creating two sines. Whereas if we have like two different sort of sines, we might hear them as different pitches. Here we kind of hear both a little bit, I think. And here we quite clearly sort of hear two different frequencies. And then in the higher frequencies, let's maybe move up a little. So we create kind of a dissonant interval here. And the dissonance, you can hear how it's just going up and down. It's just a tremolo. And then we can also do this with more complex waveforms. And kind of what really determines the dissonance, there are some really nice videos on YouTube about this, are basically the dissonances of individual harmonics against each other. That's why when the harmonic series of two sounds line up with each other, or like the overtone series, or like the partials of the sounds, they sound consonant, whereas if they're close but kind of wobbling in volume, they sound dissonant. So if we do this with a saw wave, let's just get the saw thing here. And then we kind of create the saw thing. And hear this wobbling. Or if we do this with like the stereo thing, you know, this is also the effect that like makes a respace move or something. that's a respace. If you move this down, if you're maybe here, for example, it's moving too much. Because we can hear all these different harmonics kind of going in and out of phase with each other. So it sounds like basically there's like an LFO on these harmonics. Let me try and think of some other implications this has. I actually can't right now, but like this is something really conceptually cool and kind of brings together two different, very unrelated concepts as the same thing. And it all really is just in this equation here, which is, I think, is really neat. So for example, if we have two saw waves where the partials really line up well, like for example a fifth or something like that, we will basically get a more stable waveform and we don't get this kind of tremolating effect as much. So like if we put the C that's an octave above, so like a fifth plus an octave on this, we will get a very stable waveform and very little dissonance. Or rather very slow dissonance kind of as well. Kind of the speed of this tremolo really kind of has an effect on the dissonance, like very slow tremolo doesn't really sound dissonance. Very, very fast tremolo, we once again don't really hear, and it doesn't really sound dissonance, but there's like an area in the middle where sort of the wobbling is kind of unpleasant to us, and that's really what dissonance is my understanding. So for example, this is quite a consonant sound. Maybe give this a bit of attack and stuff. We can sort of hear very slow wobbling because we're using equal temperament here. So if we just make this really long, you will hear it slightly sort of going in and out of phase if we just keep this playing long enough. But it's sort of so slow that it doesn't really sound as dissonant. You can see the sort of slight instability here, whereas for example if we use just intonation, we actually get zero wobbling, so like F0. This is perfectly stable, and this is almost perfectly stable. So that's really quite interesting. And then if we move to something that's a bit more dissonant, this here, we will start hearing this instability. And once again, we really can kind of switch between these two perspectives. Okay, is it a fast wobbling, this side of the equation, or is it just two different pitches, this side of the equation? What is dissonance? So here we can kind of hear this beating, this. You can also kind of see it here, how there's kind of this instability. Whereas here, it's kind of, because it's consonant, there's no instability, there's no beating. So yeah, stability and consonant, very, very closely related. And this works differently for waveforms where they are not, for like sounds that are not really overtone series, so like bells or something. There's a really nice YouTube video on this. Let me just look this up so you can go watch this for yourself, but it's called like, I think, let's just search YouTube. Oh, my internet is broken. Let me just quickly fix this. Let's just search dissonance, and I think there's like a guy that made like these kind of videos. The physics of dissonance. This is a really nice video. There's another one about like making a dissonant octave by just changing the types of here. This video really nice. So if you want to think about this more, the stuff I talked in this and the last video, highly recommend checking out these videos. And then we can actually make this tremolo sort of more obvious by changing different frequencies. So like, this is once again more consonant. This is like consonant interval. It's, I guess, like a major sixth. So we get a more stable sound because less wobble. Or rather, the wobble is quite fast. Kind of So the fifth, quite a stable sound. Let's use the tritone. This weird sort of wobble. And let's find a very dissonant interval. For example, I don't know, maybe a major seventh. And let's do a wobble there. You can hear this wobble, 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 wobble. Here, maybe the minor second. And so this really depends on the waveform. For sines, it sounds kind of dense and unpleasant and muddy. Whereas for sines, it really just sounds like a tremolo. I don't know, really, really interesting formula, really interesting implications for sound design and music. So basically, how I first came across this is that this guy, he had this bass that he wanted to recreate. And on the spectrum analyzer, it kind of looked like two basses very close to each other. And it looked kind of weird. Like there's almost like a pitch tremolo or something. Whereas to his ears, it just sounded like this tremolo roughness. And that's because it was both things. Because it is both things, always. You know? It's really, I don't know. Maybe I'm alone in my amazement at this. But like, two sines, just a few hertz away, sound like a tremolo of the sine in the middle. And then if the sines are very far from each other, we really just hear two sines, like here. But then if we move them closer, we start hearing one sine with a tremolo. And I think kind of in between is where dissonance lives. Yeah, I don't know, that's it really. It's really interesting to me. I hope it's interesting to you too. Bye.